If even one guard steps out of line, it will disgrace the Pope himself. That was Commandant Schmid's final warning. But when the coffin of Pope Francis entered St. Peter's Square, one guard did the unthinkable, breaking ranks and stunning the entire Vatican. What drove him to risk everything in front of the world? Before we reveal the truth, hit subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. Let's dive in. This is not just any day. Commander Schmid's voice cracked through the cold air, sharp as a rifle shot. This is the funeral of the Holy Father. If any one of you moves without orders, if even the smallest thing looks wrong, the sharpshooters are cleared to fire. No warning, no second chances. Do you understand? The line of Swiss guards didn't move a muscle. The words hung heavy in the misty air, settling on their shoulders like an invisible weight. Lucas Baumann, standing tall near the center of the line, felt the old stones of St. Peter's Square under his boots, cold and unyielding. He gripped the halberd tighter than necessary, the polished shaft firm against his gloved hand, his jaw locked tight, though his breath plumed lightly into the morning air. A gust of damp wind swept across the square, carrying with it the scent of incense and wet stone. The dawn was stubborn that day, refusing to break fully, the light crawling slow and reluctant over the Vatican's great facade. Above them, perched out of sight on rooftops and ledges, were the unseen eyes of the Special Division sharpshooters, fingers resting on triggers, scanning every twitch and tremor. Lucas heard them too, in a way, felt the prickle of crosshairs traveling lazily across the field of black-clad mourners. Gathering below, felt it itch across the rigid line of guards. Every heartbeat seemed like a drum in the distance, slow but pounding, echoing against the ancient stones. Schmid's boots clicked once, twice as he walked the line again. His gray hair was combed back so sharp it could have cut glass, his ceremonial sword hanging silent at his side. He stopped in front of Lucas, narrowing his eyes. "Baumann," he growled low, just enough for Lucas and the two guards beside him to hear. "You of all people know the cost of failure. Make sure your discipline holds." "Yes, sir," Lucas answered, voice steady as steel. The commander studied him a second longer than necessary, before moving on, his black cloak swirling behind him. From within St. Peter's Basilica, the low rumble of the organ began to spill out, somber and heavy, rolling over the square like far-off thunder. It was the signal. The funeral procession was about to emerge. Lucas kept his eyes forward, staring straight at the grand doors of the basilica, watching as the line of altar servers moved into view. First, their small figures swallowed in white robes. Behind them, priests in bright vestments, bishops in mourning purple, cardinals in their crimson, a tide of color against the sea of black suits and coats. The coffin followed last. Cypress wood, simple plain, a small crucifix pinned to the top, exactly as Pope Francis had wished. 8 pallbearers bore it out with steady, synchronized steps, heads bowed. The heavy doors swung open wider, and the sound of the organ swelled louder, deeper, vibrating in the stone underfoot. Lucas's lungs tightened as he saw the pallbearers move into the open air. His muscles strained to remain still, even as a creeping unease began to crawl up the back of his neck. He adjusted his grip on the halberd again, more out of instinct than need. The organ music reached a crescendo, and for a moment, it almost masked the restless shifting of the crowd beyond the security lines. Thousands had gathered, diplomats, faithful, pilgrims, heads of state, nuns and old women with rosaries, families clutching each other's hands. They spilled out from the square and down the Via della Conciliazione, a tapestry of mourning faces stretching toward the horizon. As the coffin reached the broad marble steps, the first chant rose from the choir behind the altar. Latin, slow and heavy, dragging sorrow from every note. Requiem aeternam dona eis Domine. Grant them eternal rest, O Lord. Lucas stood unmoving, a sentinel in a frozen world. The cypress coffin reached its place at the foot of the basilica. The crowd stilled. Even the pigeons seemed to hold their breath. Lucas exhaled slow through his nose, steadying himself, planting his boots firmer against the old stones. The square fell utterly silent, and then out of that silence a sharp cry, high broken, ripped the air like a knife. "Stop, please, stop!" Lucas's heart jerked sideways in his chest. Heads jerked up in the crowd, shoulders twisted. Even the choir faltered. Mid-hymn, a sour, broken note echoing off the marble walls of the basilica. Lucas felt his stomach knot hard and fast. Somewhere near the front barriers, he spotted her, a small figure in a faded blue coat, darting between the adults like a bird flushed from hiding. A little girl, her face blotchy with tears, her arms pumping awkwardly as she bolted past stunned onlookers. She wasn't running towards safety. She wasn't running away. She was charging straight for the coffin. For a split second, the whole world just froze. The click of the safety switches broke that stillness. Cold, mechanical sounds from the rooftops above Lucas's blood iced over. The sharpshooters had her in their sights. On the comm units tucked inside the collars of the guards, a voice crackled sharp. "Stand by!" The order wasn't shouted. It was cold and efficient. Ready. Waiting. Lucas's hands tightened around the halberd until the wood dug into his gloves. He forced himself to breathe. To think. Across the line, he caught the shifting gazes of his fellow guards, sharp, brief glances flashing under their helmets. They all saw it. They all heard it. But not a soul moved. Not a single damned one. Protocol hammered inside Lucas's skull. Maintain formation. Observe report. Do not break the line. Above all, never act alone. He swallowed hard, staring at the little girl stumbling closer to the steps, where the Holy Father's coffin rested in its place of honor. She was waving something in her hand, a crumpled envelope. Maybe it was hard to tell, and sobbing loud enough to cut through the thick air like a blade. Lucas's heart jackknifed inside his chest. Every instinct trained into him screamed to stay put, to let security handle it, to obey the traditions older than the bones beneath their feet. Only security wasn't moving. No one was. And the girl she tripped. The girl. Her shoe caught the uneven edge of the ancient cobblestones and she pitched forward, arms flailing, the envelope flying loose from her grasp. She hit the ground hard. A ragged gasp went up from the crowd. Somewhere in the gathering of priests and bishops, someone muttered a prayer under his breath. Lucas felt something inside him snap. There was no more thinking after that. The world narrowed to a tunnel, and at the far end of it was that little girl, sprawled on the cold stone, so small and breakable under 1,000 watchful eyes and 1,000 loaded weapons. Lucas moved. Gasps burst from the crowd. Somewhere the radio buzzed again, urgent and sharp. "Hold fire! Hold fire!" But Lucas didn't hear it. All he knew was he had about 3 seconds to reach her before someone else decided she was a threat too dangerous to risk. He hit the ground harder than he expected, his knee slamming into the cobbles as he scooped her up into his arms. She was lighter than she looked, all bone and shivering terror. She clutched at his chest without even thinking, sobbing brokenly into the metal of his breastplate. Lucas curled himself around her, instinctively shielding her body with his own. He half-turned, putting his back toward the sniper's likely angles, broad shoulders braced to take the shot if one came, his arms locked firm around her trembling form. Over the buzz of fear and confusion from the crowd, he felt the high, sharp tension of the square winding tighter like a wire pulled to the breaking point. Lucas lifted his gaze, slow, deliberate, and swept it across the rooftop edges. "Don't move," Lucas whispered into the girl's tangled hair. "Don't move, sweetheart. You're safe now, I've got you." Her small hands fisted into the fabric of his uniform. He felt the wet heat of her tears soaking through. The sharp crackle of radios buzzed again in his ear. But no new orders came. No gunfire. Blessed silence. And then slowly, like a ripple passing through still water, the chaos in the square began to ease. Security officers, plain clothes and uniformed, started moving in cautious, but no longer frantic. Some of the higher clergy closer to the coffin stepped back, giving Lucas room as he rose to his feet, still holding the girl tight against his chest. Somewhere in the crowd, a woman began sobbing openly. Elsewhere, cameras clicked hundreds, thousands, immortalizing the image of the Swiss guard, breaking rank, cradling a child in defiance of centuries of rigid ceremony. Lucas barely noticed. The weight of the square seemed to press down harder once Lucas finally crossed back over the inner line of security. The crowd buzzed behind the barricades, a low, trembling murmur rolling through the mist. Lucas barely heard it. He knelt down behind the first row of guards, tucking the small girl close against his side. His arm was still wrapped protectively around her shoulders, his broad body shielding her from the countless unseen eyes perched on the rooftops above. She was crying so hard she couldn't catch her breath. He could feel her whole frame shaking, hiccuping with broken sobs that seemed to tear right out of her chest. Lucas knelt there for a moment longer, just breathing, feeling her tiny fists clutching at the stiff fabric of his uniform. "Easy, sweetheart," he whispered, voice rough. "You're safe now. Nobody's gonna hurt you, I promise." It took her a long minute to answer. When she finally did, it came out in a desperate, gasping rush. I just wanted to give the Pope a letter to thank him for saving my mom." Lucas tightened his grip on her shoulders just slightly. Not enough to hurt, just enough to hold her steady. He didn't ask for more details. He didn't need them. Her words dropped into his chest like stones into deep water, spreading ripples he couldn't stop. She twisted in his arms, fumbling at the inside of her coat. When she pulled her hand free, she held a crumpled piece of paper, battered damp edges fraying from how tightly she had clutched it. The letter looked small, almost pitiful in her shaking hand. Lucas took a slow breath, willing his heart to stop hammering against his ribs. Around them he could feel the unease growing. Guards shifting their stances. A captain stepping forward, talking fast into his earpiece. Authority figures moving closer, concern tightening their mouths. They were going to take her away. They were going to take both of them away. Lucas knew it as sure as he knew the weight of the halberd that had been stripped from his hands. His mind raced. Rules flashed through his head like cards slapped onto a table. Protocol, obedience, public decorum, diplomatic security, no deviation, no exceptions. But another voice rose up inside him. Quieter, deeper, older. The voice of a man he had once knelt before in a sunlit study who had said, "Sometimes the holiest thing we can do is move when we're told to stand still." Lucas glanced down at the girl again. Her big brown eyes stared up at him wide with fear and hope, twisted tight together. Her little fist tightened around the letter. No, not like this. Not dragged away. Not silenced. Lucas stood lifting her easily against his side. She clung to his neck. The letter crumpled between them. And as the officers moved in reaching out voices, rising in sharp commands, Lucas turned sideways, using his body like a shield, and stepped back toward the heart of the square. "No," he said simply. The nearest officer stopped mid-stride. "Stand down. Guardsman, you're out of line." Lucas didn't argue, didn't shout. He just kept walking. The girl whimpered softly against his shoulder, but didn't fight him. The coffin lay ahead, framed by the towering steps of St. Peter's draped in the cold, early light. The gathered clergy parted in stiff, uneasy motions, their eyes wide, one foot in front of the other, heavy, deliberate, carrying the weight of every rule he was about to break, and not caring anymore. Lucas heard the scuffle behind him, heard radio crackles, heard someone muttering rapid Italian into a headset, but no gunfire came. No hand grabbed his arm. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was something else. The little girl lifted her head slightly. Lucas felt her trembling against him. "Are we gonna get in trouble?" she whispered. Lucas smiled grimly. "Maybe," he said, "but not today, and not for doing what was right." The marble beneath Lucas's boots echoed with each step, a hollow sound that seemed far too loud in the unnatural quiet that had fallen over the square. He reached the foot of the steps and stopped. The casket rested there, simple, unadorned, exactly as Pope Francis had asked. No gold, no excessive display, just a plain cypress box, humble and heavy with meaning. Lucas crouched down, setting the little girl gently on her feet. She stood frozen for a moment, clutching the crumpled letter so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her eyes darted to the gathering of cardinals, bishops, Swiss guards, all watching a sea of faces blurred by shock, confusion, reverence. Lucas lowered his head slightly, catching her gaze. "You can do it," he said softly. "He'd want you to." The girl nodded once, a quick, jerky motion. Then she turned. Her small feet shuffled forward across the few feet of marble separating them from the coffin. You could hear a pin drop. Even the pigeons had stopped cooing overhead. Lucas stayed on one knee, every muscle in his body strung tight, ready to spring if anyone dared interfere, but no one did. The girl reached the casket. She hesitated just a breath, then reached up, stretching on tiptoe, and placed the letter gently atop the wood. Her voice was barely louder than a whisper, but in the stillness it carried. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for letting my mama live." Then she stepped back, tears shining on her cheeks, and pressed both palms together in a clumsy, earnest prayer. Lucas felt something shift in the air around them. Not the kind of shift you could see, but the kind you felt deep under your ribs, the kind that made grown men clench their jaws and blink fast. From his place beside the girl, Lucas rose slowly, fluidly, and brought his hand up to his breast in the formal salute of the Swiss Guard. It was not the crisp, mechanical gesture demanded by ceremonies. It was slower, heavier, a gesture weighted with grief, gratitude, and something that felt a lot like defiance. A final tribute. For a man who had dared once to tell him that duty without compassion was just another kind of prison. Around the edges of the square, faces shifted. Some of the cardinals bowed their heads. Some security officers quietly lowered their hands from their weapons. Lucas let his arm fall back to his side, his breathing finally beginning to slow. He glanced down at the girl still standing solemn and small before the casket. She looked up at him, a tremulous smile breaking across her tear-streaked face. "You did good, sweetheart," Lucas said, his voice low, thick. "You did real good." The girl tucked herself back against his side without a word, and together they turned away from the coffin, leaving behind a letter, a prayer, and a silence that spoke louder than any choir. The walk away from the square was the longest of Lucas Bauman's life. No one said a word. Not the guards who surrounded him. Not the Vatican security officers who flanked his every step. Not the stunned mourners who watched them pass. Only the slow toll of the bells kept count, marking every footfall like a drumbeat at a funeral. Inside a funeral. Lucas kept his hand firm around the little girl's feeling, her small fingers squeezed back, desperate and trembling. He didn't look back at the square. He didn't dare. The corridors of the Vatican closed in tight as they moved deeper inside. Stone walls, heavy doors, centuries of tradition pressing down on them from all sides. Lucas recognized where they were being taken, a meeting hall tucked away from the grand spaces. Tourists knew a room used when the church needed its own to answer for their sins. At the heavy oak doors, 2 more guards waited. They swung them open with a solemn nod, and Lucas led the girl inside. The room smelled faintly of old wood-stone dust and incense that hadn't been burned in years. A long table stretched across the center, behind which 3 men sat, each one draped in the heavy robes of power. Cardinal Favreau, Commander Schmid, Archbishop Tremblay. All 3 stared down at him with expressions carved out of stone. Lucas tightened his grip on the girl's hand and walked her up to the center of the room. When they stopped, she edged closer to him, half hiding behind the line of his body. He dropped to one knee beside her, keeping his voice low and steady. "I'm right here," he said. "Don't be scared. Just tell the truth. That's all you need to do." She nodded, a sharp, jerky motion, her face pale under the weight of the moment. Lucas rose to stand before the tribunal, his hands resting loosely at his sides. He squared his shoulders, raised his chin, and waited. The silence stretched thick and heavy. Finally, Cardinal Favreau spoke. His voice was cool, but not cruel. "Guardsman Baumann," he said, "you are charged with abandoning your post during the most solemn rite of our Holy Church. You breached protocol during the funeral of the Holy Father himself, in full view of the world." He paused. His gaze hardened. "Do you understand the gravity of what you have done?" Lucas swallowed against the dryness in his throat. His heart hammered in his chest, but his voice when he spoke was steady. "I do," he said, "and yet you acted anyway." The Archbishop cut in sharp and unforgiving. "You chose to disgrace your uniform, your oath, and your God for what? A moment of pity." Lucas didn't flinch. "I chose," he said, "to protect a child. I chose to honor the spirit of our faith, not just the letter of it." Commander Schmid leaned forward, hands folded tightly atop the table. "By your actions," he growled, "you invited scandal chaos and risked the life of every man and woman present. You understand that too." Lucas met his old commander's eyes, feeling the years of training, of discipline, of loyalty, pressing against him like iron bars. "I understand," he said, "and I accept whatever judgment you pass." There was a stir among the tribunal, a shift of weight and exchanged glances like men uneasy on ground they thought would be firm. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the faint crackle of the fire burning low in the hearth. Then a small voice broke through. I just wanted to say thank you." All heads turned. The girl had stepped out from behind Lucas, her tiny hands clenched tight in front of her, her eyes wide and wet, but brave. "I wrote the letter," she said, because the Pope saved my mama." Her voice cracked on the words, but she pushed through, chest heaving. "When my mama was young," she said, "she got real sick, real bad. She was all alone and she was gonna give up. But Father Francis, he wasn't the Pope yet. He found her, he sat with her, he prayed with her. He told her God still had a plan." Tears streamed down her cheeks, unchecked. And she believed him. She got better. She had me. If he hadn't been there, I wouldn't even be alive. She pressed her palms together like a prayer, her whole body trembling. "I just wanted to say thank you. That's all." The words echoed in the stone room, raw and trembling, and more powerful than any sermon. Nobody moved. Even the seasoned faces of the tribunal cracked a little, their rigid lines softening their eyes, lowering to their hands, the stone walls inside them crumbling just enough to let the truth in. Lucas reached out and rested a steadying hand on the girl's shoulder. She leaned into him, exhausted but still standing tall. The fire popped once, sending a tiny shower of sparks up the chimney. For a long moment, no one spoke. No judgment came, only the shared weight of a story that stripped away uniforms, titles, and years, leaving only men, bare and human. Lucas stayed still, waiting for whatever would come next. Refusing to plead, refusing to run, he had said his piece. So had she. Now it was in God's hands. The silence held heavy and suffocating inside the small tribunal room. Lucas stood tall, the girl's small hand still clutched in his own, both of them waiting for the judgment that seemed to stretch on forever. Cardinal Favreau shifted in his seat, the firelight throwing deep lines across his face. Archbishop Tremblay coughed lightly but said nothing. Commander Schmid's fingers tapped a slow, irritated rhythm against the table's edge. Just when it seemed the weight of it all might crush them, the girl stepped forward again, this time with a suddenness that startled even Lucas. She broke free from his grasp and stood alone before the three powerful men. Tears welled up in her wide brown eyes. She opened her mouth once, no sound came. She tried again, and then the dam inside her broke completely. "I'm sorry," she sobbed, her voice filling every corner of the cold stone room. "It's my fault. Please don't punish him. He didn't do anything wrong. I made him. It was me. Her small body shook with the force of her cries, uncontrollable, desperate, pure. She cried with her whole being, big, heaving sobs that bounced off the ancient walls, loud and raw, without any shame or filter, the way only children could cry. The cardinals flinched back slightly, startled as if her grief had physically pushed against them. Even Commander Schmid, rigid and sharp as a blade a moment ago, leaned back with a tight, bewildered frown. Lucas knelt down fast, pulling her into his arms again, trying to steady her trembling form, but she pulled away, stubborn, facing the tribunal directly, tears still streaming down her cheeks. "Please," she begged, her voice hoarse and broken. "Please don't hurt him. He just wanted to help me. He just wanted to help God. He's a good man." Her words hung there, heavy as lead. No one in the room could speak. The air itself seemed to crackle with the naked honesty pouring out of that little girl. Lucas closed his eyes for a moment, steadying the sting behind his own. When he opened them, it was to see Cardinal Favreau, staring not at him, but at the girl, and then at the crucifix, hanging behind them on the wall. The cardinal rose slowly from his seat. He folded his hands together, bowing his head. It was not the motion of a judge passing sentence. It was the motion of a man offering prayer. "We are all," Favreau said finally, voice thick with feeling, "called to be servants of love, even when the world demands otherwise." He raised his head, then his eyes shining slightly. "And today," he said, looking at Lucas and the little girl, "we have been reminded of the true heart of Christ, a heart that shields the small, that lifts up the broken, that welcomes even the humblest gift." He turned to the other tribunal members, his voice gaining strength. "The Lord himself said, 'Let the little children come unto me, and forbid them not, for of such is the kingdom of heaven.'" A hush deeper than before filled the room. Lucas could feel it settle over them all, a sacred, weighty silence that had nothing to do with judgment and everything to do with grace. Archbishop Tremblay cleared his throat, uncomfortable but offered no argument. Even Schmid, stern and proud, gave the faintest of nods, more to himself than anyone else. Favreau stepped around the table, walking slowly toward Lucas and the girl. He laid a gentle hand on Lucas's shoulder, another on the girl's small, shaking head. "You are both forgiven," he said simply, "because mercy is greater than discipline, and love, true love, is greater than any law written by men." The girl hiccuped a little, wiping her face against her sleeve. Lucas bowed his head low, humbled beyond words. Favreau turned back to the tribunal. "There will be no punishment," he said firmly. "There will be no shame." He turned back to Lucas, his face grave but kind. "You will step back from public duties for a time, guardsman," he said. "Not as punishment, but as a mercy to give space for the world to heal, and for this act of kindness to take root without stain." Lucas nodded once deeply. "I understand," he said quietly. The girl grabbed his hand again, squeezing so hard her fingers turned white. Favreau smiled, a small, weary smile touched with both sorrow and hope. "Today," he said softly, "the Church remembers that it is not marble and gold that honors God. It is the love we show to one another." He lifted his eyes to the high ceiling, to the crucifix overhead. "Blessed be the God of mercy," he said, voice carrying like a hymn. "Blessed be." Lucas whispered back, his throat too thick to say more. They left the tribunal room together, the heavy doors swinging closed behind them with a final soft click. The hall outside was dim and cool. Lucas paused there, letting the girl catch her breath. She looked up at him, her face still blotchy and wet, but calmer now. "Are we really okay?" she asked, her voice small, uncertain. Lucas knelt again, brushing a damp lock of hair from her forehead. "We're okay," he said. "Better than okay." He squeezed her hand. "We did right, sweetheart." We did right in his eyes. The girl's smile was crooked and tired, but it bloomed anyway. Hand in hand, they walked through the long halls of the Vatican, their footsteps soft against the old stones. Behind them, the machinery of the church would grind and groan and adjust, slow and massive. But somewhere deeper, somewhere no man could reach with rules or fear, something had changed. Lucas Baumann, Swiss guard, servant of ceremony, had become something else today. A guardian, not of tradition, but of the living heart that tradition was meant to protect. And the girl she had reminded even the oldest men in Christendom that sometimes it takes a child's cry to move heaven and earth. As they stepped out into the fading afternoon light, Lucas tilted his face up toward the endless blue above St. Peter's dome. "Thank you," he whispered, words meant for no one but the sky. And hand in hand, bearing no sword, wearing no medals, he and the girl walked into whatever tomorrow would bring, together. Wow, what a story. Right? When I first finished writing and living through Lucas and that little girl's journey, I couldn't help but sit back and just breathe. This wasn't just about a soldier breaking protocol. It was about something far bigger, about choosing mercy over fear, choosing love over cold tradition. Lucas didn't save the girl because he was ordered to. He saved her because deep down, he heard the voice of something greater. The voice of compassion, of faith, of God himself whispering, "Protect the small love without hesitation." This story reminds me, and maybe reminds all of us, that no matter how many rules we build, no matter how many systems we protect, it's our humanity that God cares about most. The rules matter, but they are never bigger than the beating heart God placed inside us. Today, as we honor this fictional farewell to Pope Francis I, want to take a moment to truly thank God for giving us leaders who taught us about humility, mercy, and love. May the soul of our Holy Father rest in eternal peace, embraced by the arms of the Lord, and may we never forget the simple courage it takes to stand up, even when it's hard for what's right. If this story touched your heart even a little, please drop a comment below. Tell me what you would have done if you were Lucas. Would you have stood still? Or would you have stepped forward? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let's keep this beautiful conversation going. See you in the next story, my friends. God bless.